everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rioter, and today we're going to be talking about all of the weaknesses of the Zeds in Killing Floor 2 and what weapons you can use to potentially get better results against certain enemies. So first off, I'm going to be explaining all of the different damage types that can be inflicted onto enemies, as well as weapons that represent those damage types. Now, pretty much every weapon in this game can represent multiple damage types. Even something as simple as like the AR-15, you can still bash with it, so it does still have some bludgeoning damage when you bash with it, but also AR ballistic damage, so assault rifle ballistic damage, that you can also inflict upon enemies. So keep that in mind whenever we're talking about these, especially with some of the melee weapons, because some of them have multiple different types of attacks, whether it be slashing, bludgeoning, piercing damage. So let's go through each of them and talk about them. So first up is piercing damage. Piercing damage is things like the nail gun or stabs from weapons like the Zweihander and the katana. Not a whole lot of weapons do piercing damage, but they generally go right through enemies, unless it's, of course, the Zweihander or the katana. That depends solely on how close the enemy is to you and if there's another enemy behind them. Next up, we got slashing damage. Once again, this is similar to the katana or the Zweihander, but swinging them normally, pretty self-explanatory. Bludgeoning damage is next. This is anything that hits with blunt force, so things like the Krovel's heavy attack, although its light attack does count as slashing damage. A lot of bash attacks from pretty much any of the guns, and weapons like the pulverizer. We have toxic damage after that, or poison damage. This is any damage that's inflicted with poison over time, so this could be healing darts from the medic weapons or the medic's grenades. Those all inflict toxic damage or poison damage that deals damage over time. Fire damage, this is pretty self-explanatory, anything that burns something with fire. Microwave damage, these are specifically the microwave weapons, so the microwave gun or the Helios rifle. Explosives, again, this is pretty self-explanatory. Most grenades, as well as pretty much most of, if not all of Demo's weapons, I think count as explosive weapons to some extent. Freezing, which is a status effect that is from the freeze thrower or from the winter bites, anything that freezes an enemy. Shell damage, this is related to explosive weapons. These can be weapons like the M16 or the grenade launcher that the actual projectile of the explosive, not the explosive damage itself. So you can hit with the shell and then the explosion. So you get two different damage types whenever you hit an enemy with a projectile like the grenade launcher or the RPG. Bleeding damage, this is damage over time from bleeding. This is pretty much just the Hemogoblin or the Vampire. And the EMP effect, this is from EMP grenades as well as certain other weapons like the Medic's Railgun and the Berserker's Tesla launcher. We then have different ballistic types of damage towards enemies. These are submachine guns, assault rifles, shotguns, handguns, and rifles. Pretty much every weapon that doesn't fit into one of the previous categories will fit into these, or like I said, multiple weapons can fit into multiple categories. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the Zeds and what they're weak to. So we're just going to be going down the list, starting out with the weakest Zeds and going up to the strongest Zeds. We're going to start out with the Cyst. The Cyst takes neutral damage from piercing weapons, toxic, fire, explosives, slashing from the knife specifically, so anybody's secondary knife, whether that be the machete, the gore shiv, the bowie knife, anything like that, will take neutral damage. Freezing, shells, bleeding, and EMP. They do take 15% reduced damage from slashing attacks from other weapons other than the knife. So this could be like the Zweihander or the katana. They take 10% reduced damage from bludgeoning damage, so this could be again the Krovel or the pulverizer. And 75% reduced damage from microwaves, so the microwave gun or the Helios rifle. They do take 50% bonus damage from submachine guns, so pretty much any of SWAT's weapons besides the nail gun and the bastion, and 50% bonus damage from assault rifles, so that actually would include the bastion. Neutral damage towards shotguns and neutral damage towards rifles, but 1% bonus damage taken from handguns. So handguns, assault rifles, and submachine guns will do better against cysts than pretty much any other weapons will. Although they are still cysts, so rifles and shotguns doing neutral damage will still likely kill them with body shots, even on the highest difficulty, as well as things like fire will kill them very quickly since they still take neutral damage from it. The only weapon that kind of stands out here is the microwave guns, that you may not want to be using against them, but again, you'll kill them so fast with it that you probably won't notice it. Up next, we have the Alpha Clot, and the Alpha Clot is kind of similar to the Cyst. It takes neutral damage from piercing weapons, toxic weapons, fire weapons, explosives, slashing from the knife, freezing weapons, shells, bleeding, EMP. They also take neutral damage from rifles, handguns, shotguns, and assault rifles. They take reduced damage by 15% for slashing weapons, 10% reduced damage from bludgeoning weapons, and 75% reduced damage, once again, from microwaves. They do take 50% bonus damage from submachine guns. The submachine gun is the best weapon to be using against them because you will be doing 50% bonus damage to them. Again, pretty straightforward. These guys aren't super strong or anything. Just shoot them with whatever and you'll likely kill them very quick. They are just one of the lowest levels of Zeds, so you shouldn't have to worry that much. And this is one of the reasons why the submachine guns perform so well in the early waves. Up next we have slashers. Slashers take neutral damage, once again, from piercing, toxic, fire, explosives, slashing from the knife, freezing, shells, bleeding, and EMP effects, as well as rifles, shotguns, and assault rifles. They take bonus damage by 50% from the submachine gun, 1% bonus damage from handguns, and then reduced damage by 15% for slashing weapons, 10% for bludgeoning weapons, and 75% reduction from microwave weapons. Again, very similar to the Claude and very similar to the assist. Pretty much just use whatever you want against them. You have a good advantage with submachine guns, but everything else should work just fine. Moving on to stalkers. Now, stalkers are a bit different from the other enemies. They take neutral damage from piercing, slashing, bludgeoning, poison, freezing, shells, bleeding, and EMP effects. They also take neutral damage from shotguns and handguns. Now, they take reduced damage by 15% from rifles. They take reduced damage from submachine guns by 10%. They take increased damage from assault rifles by 50%, and then they have 25% reduction in damage towards fire and explosives, as well as 80% damage reduction from microwaves. So microwaves are not really all that strong against stalkers. Once again, they don't have a ton of health, so shooting them in the head with the Helios rifle should still kill them with one shot, as well as you can kill them quite fast with something like the microwave gun, especially if you're using the floor fire, because even though fire is also reduced, it's not reduced by that much. Assault rifles definitely win here, which makes sense. Commando naturally has an advantage towards stalkers because they can see them, as opposed to every other class that, well, can't highlight them. Up next, we have the Crawler. Crawlers take neutral damage from rifles, handguns, shotguns, piercing damage, slashing damage, toxic, explosives, shells, freezing, bleed, and EMP effects. Crawlers take increased damage from assault rifles and submachine guns by 50%, so you will be doing better against them if you're playing SWAT or Commando. Not really a huge surprise there, as they do well against these small enemies. Crawlers take 10% reduced damage from bludgeoning attacks and fire damage. They'll still die incredibly fast to fire, and they're not going to survive a pulverizer hit to the head or anything like that. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. They do take, once again, 80% reduced damage from microwave damage, though. Again, with the microwave gun, you will kill them so fast, and with the Helios rifle, you can one-shot them. Crawlers generally aren't that scary so long as you can kill them before they start swarming you. Alright, and then our last of the lesser Zeds, or trash Zeds as some people call them, is the Gorefast. The Gorefast takes neutral damage from explosives, freezing damage, shells, bleeding, EMP, handguns, and submachine guns. They take 25% increased damage towards rifles, 20% increased damage towards assault rifles, and 60% increased damage towards shotguns. Shotguns work incredibly well against the Gorefast and the Gore Fiends, as we'll see in a second. They do take 25% reduced damage if they're attacked with piercing damage or with poison damage. They also take 15% less damage if they're attacked with fire or microwave damage, and they take 10% reduced damage from bludgeoning attacks. They also take 20% reduced damage from slashing attacks. So weapons like the shotgun and the rifles, and even the assault rifle to an extent, will give you an advantage over the Gorefast, whereas weapons like the microwave gun don't struggle as much against these enemies. Remember, microwaves generally work better against enemies with the more metal on them, which is usually the larger Zeds, but this is one of the smaller ones that does have some metal on him. Melee weapons do reduce damage towards them, but melee weapons will work just fine too. Alright, next up we're going to be talking about the elite versions of the enemies, now that we've talked about all the lesser versions. So the first one is the Alpha Clot Rioter, and the Rioter has some interesting weaknesses from assault rifles, shotguns, explosives, piercing, and toxic damage. They take 1% increased damage towards handguns. They take 50% increased damage towards submachine guns. They take 15% reduced damage from slashing, 10% reduced damage from bludgeoning, 3 times bonus damage towards fire, so fire works incredibly well against these guys. 75% reduced damage from microwave. This is one of the stranger choices here because microwave damage is usually good against armored enemies, and the armor is quite armored, but in this case they take reduced damage. They take 5 times bonus damage from bleeding, specifically from the Hemogoblin. I'm not sure if this applies to the vampire too, but it is from the Hemogoblin, and you can kill him quite fast with this. They also take neutral damage to freezing, shell, and EMP damage. And then there is some unique weapons that also deal bonus damage to them. Specifically, the Arc Generator. The Arc Generator will do 3.5 times bonus damage with its beam attack, 20% bonus damage with its sphere, with its secondary fire. So the Arc Generator specifically will do an immense amount of damage to the Rioter. For such a heavy armored unit, they have so many weaknesses, but sometimes that's how it is. Up next, we have the Elite Crawler, and the Elite Crawler has the exact same spread of stats as the regular Crawler. So pretty much base damage towards everything except for assault rifles and submachine guns, where you do 50% more damage, and microwave guns, where you do 80% reduced damage to them. That's really the only difference, and they have a little bit more health. They should still be very easy for you to kill, just be aware of the gas cloud that they emit after they die. Up next, we have the Gore Fiend. This also has the exact same damage resistance as the Gore Fast. They just have more health and can attack in a few different ways. So once again, shotguns do incredibly well against them, rifles do incredibly well against them, and assault rifles do get a bonus from them, whereas melee weapons get a little bit of a decrease towards them, but still shouldn't have much issue. Alright, up next we've got the Bloat. The Bloat is our first medium enemy, and the Bloat has a lot of damage resistances. So they take neutral damage from freezing attacks, shells, bleeding, and EMP. Those are the only... oh, and fire. Those are the only weapons that do neutral damage to them, which is why fire is so good against the Bloats. 50% damage reduction towards explosives, 75% damage reduction towards slashing and bludgeoning, 20% damage reduction towards microwaves, 75% reduction towards toxic damage, 75% reduction towards piercing damage, 65% damage reduction towards submachine guns and assault rifles, 75% reduction to shotguns, 70% reduction from rifles, and then some kind of odd weapons where they take 60% reduced damage from the AR-15, so the AR-15 will hit harder than the other assault rifles, at least percentage-wise, and 35% damage reduction from the 9mm handgun. So once again, the 9mm will do more damage than other handguns percentage-wise. Bloats can be quite tanky, and certain weapons don't work incredibly well against them. Explosives don't work extremely well against them early on. Fire works incredibly well, though, so try to use fire or shell damage with something like a grenade launcher can kill them. And even with the damage reduction of certain weapons, weapons like the rifles can usually one-shot headshot them, so that might be worth doing. And of course your 9mm will do more damage than your other weapons against them, unless you're running something like Firebug. There is also one other weapon I forgot to mention about this, and that is that it has 42% reduced damage towards the HRG Tesla launcher. So if you're using that, the Tesla launcher will do less than other microwave weapons will. Moving on from the Bloat, we have the Siren. And the Siren doesn't have as many damage resists as the Bloat does. The Siren will take neutral damage from slashing, bludgeoning, freezing, shells, bleeding, EMP, submachine guns, assault rifles, shotguns, handguns, and rifles. They do have damage resist towards explosives and microwaves by 15%, reduced damage from fire and piercing by 50%, and reduce damage from toxic weapons by 75%. There is one weapon that actually does bonus damage to the Siren, which is the double barrel shotgun, which will do 10% bonus damage towards them. Some people have told me that this is a reference to Left 4 Dead, that it's for crowning the witch, which it very well could be. It could also potentially be a reference to Army of Darkness or any of the Evil Dead movies, with Ash's boomstick being strong against sirens. So I guess that's why it's put in here. I should also mention, unlike other Zeds, where generally the head is the weak spot, and you'll do more damage if you hit something in the head, Sirens do take bonus damage from headshots, but they also take bonus damage from the neck shot. So if you can hit them in either spot, you will be doing more damage. Pretty much all the other Zeds that we've talked about so far, their weak spot is the head, with the exception of potentially the Rioter, because you can shoot him in the legs or the arms and you'll do more damage that way. Everything else, just shoot for the head. And even the Rioter, you can't shoot in the head if you have a high-powered weapon. If you're shooting them with something like the 500 Magnum, you'll probably take their head clean off. Up next, we've got the Husk. And the Husk is another kind of interesting one. The Husk will take neutral damage from freezing, shells, bleeding, EMP, the usual stuff. Neutral damage from shotguns, as well as the 9mm handgun and the Remington 1858 revolver, oddly enough. The Husk will take 50% reduced damage from piercing damage, 75% reduced damage from slashing, 15% from bludgeoning, 75% from toxic damage, 50% damage reduction towards fire, 25% damage reduction from explosives. They will take an additional 15% more damage from microwaves though. So weapons like the Helios rifle, the microwave gun will do bonus damage towards the husks. The husks also take 25% reduced damage from submachine guns, 40% reduced damage from assault rifles, 15% reduced damage from handguns, and 30% reduced damage from rifles. So the husks are particularly weak to microwave weapons. Again, this is great for Firebug. They also take neutral damage towards shotguns, so support should have no problem killing them. And even though, once again, you reduce rifles damage by 30%, you should still be able to kill them very easily. The weak spot for the Husk is not only the head, but also their backpack. They will take 50% bonus damage if you shoot them in the backpack, and this can result in an explosion, which will kill all enemies around the Husk, or at least damage all enemies around the Husk. Depends on how strong the enemies are around it. And our last medium Zed is the EDRs. Now the EDRs vary a little bit depending on which model you get, but for the most part, they all take about the same amount of damage. So I'm going to be going through those, and it depends on whether you're hitting their armor or damaging their health, which is a little bit weird. Anyway, they take neutral damage from handguns, rifles, freezing, shells, bleeding, and EMP. 15% reduced damage from piercing. They take 25% increased damage towards slashing and bludgeoning, though. Melee weapons are pretty good against them. They take 95% reduction from toxic damage. You can't poison a robot very easily, but you sort of can do it. Unless it's from the heal thrower, in which case they take 20% increased damage from the heal thrower, which is, again, one of those weird mechanics. I should also say they take 5 times bonus damage towards bleeding. So the robots bleed better than most other enemies for whatever reason. They take 50% increased damage from fire damage. Firebug is quite good against the EDRs. They take a little over 3 times bonus damage towards microwave weapons. Microwave weapons like the Helios rifle and the microwave gun kill these things incredibly fast, which is also one of the reasons why Firebug is so good against the Matriarch, is because they can just work on crowd control with their Helios rifle against pretty much everything. They take 2.5 times bonus damage to explosives. Again, Demo is quite good against these enemies too. And the arc generator also deals bonus damage to these enemies, dealing 3.5 times bonus damage with its primary fire of the electric current, and 2 times bonus damage from the sphere that it shoots out. For regular weapons, though, they also take 5% increased damage from submachine guns and assault rifles, and 20% increased damage from shotguns. So even though the EDRs are quite tanky, there is a lot of weapons that can deal bonus damage to them. The weak spot on the EDRs is also the chest. They will take slightly increased damage to the head, but they can have their head knocked off and still be attacking. You want to go for their core in their chest. Any attack done to that will do 3.5 times bonus damage towards them. Up next, we've got the large Zeds. First up, we're going to be talking about the quarter pound, which is very similar to the flesh pound, so a lot of these values are going to seem similar in a second when we talk about them. Quarter pounds take neutral damage towards microwave weapons, explosive weapons, freezing weapons, shells, bleeding, and EMP. They take reduced damage from everything else. They take 25% reduced damage from rifles, handguns, shotguns, and piercing damage, so those weapons are generally some of the better weapons to be hitting them with. 20% reduction from the Helios rifle, because it's not counted the same as something like the microwave gun. Quarter pounds also take 38% reduced damage from slashing, bludgeoning, assault rifles, and submachine guns, so those weapons aren't as effective against them. They take 69% reduced damage from toxic damage, and 63% reduced damage from fire. Very strange values, as well as they take 50% damage reduction from the Tesla launcher. Quarter pounds are generally best handled with microwave weapons or explosive weapons, or using shells because the explosive weapon plus the shell. Other than that, weapons like shotguns and rifles and handguns generally do better than some of the other weapons. Oh, and piercing weapons too, like the HRG nail gun, or any of the nail guns in general, or stabbing attacks. Moving on from quarter pounds, we have flesh pounds, where the values are changed slightly. Take neutral damage from microwaves, freezing, shells, bleeding, EMP. All of those will do neutral damage towards the quarter pound, or towards the flesh pounds, the same way that they did towards the quarter pounds. One difference, though, is that flesh pounds will take bonus damage from explosives, where quarter pounds won't for whatever reason. They'll just take neutral damage. Flesh pounds take 50% increased damage towards explosives. That's why Demo is really strong against them, and why Survivalist, if you're running Demo weapons, can also be really strong against them, or even Medic with explosive weapons. They will take reduced damage by 25% towards piercing damage, shotguns, handguns, and rifles. same weapons that we talked about before. 20% reduced damage towards the Helios rifle. Again, we talked about that. 50% reduced damage from the Tesla launcher, as well as the Tesla launcher damage over time effect. Submachine guns and assault rifles, as well as slashing. So not as good. 40% reduced damage towards blunt, as well as 70% reduction from fire damage and 75% reduction from poison damage. Meaning that poison and fire weapons don't work all that well against flesh pounds. They can make them angry or cause them to freak out, but not really the best for actually killing them. Explosives are definitely the best towards flesh pounds, which is why Demo excels at killing them. Other than that, rifles, shotguns, and handguns are a pretty decent choice, as well as piercing damage once again. And last for the regular Zeds, we got to talk about the Skrakes. Now the Skrakes will take neutral damage from slashing, blunt damage, freezing, shells, bleeding, EMP, submachine guns, assault rifles, and rifles. All of those do neutral damage towards the Skrake. The Skrake will take 10% bonus damage from microwave weapons, unless it's the HRG Tesla launcher again, and then it's 40% reduced damage for whatever reason. They do also take a massive amount of damage from the RPG rocket's impact by 4 times damage. Now this counts towards the RPG actually impacting like the shell damage does. So whether you hit the enemy and whether you hit the Skrake and the RPG explodes, or you hit the Skrake and it's a dud, it will still do 4 times its damage from the impact, not from the explosion. The explosion will be stacked on top of that though, so it is generally better to hit Skrakes in the head from a distance with the RPG so that you can make it explode. But that is a more difficult shot than just getting up close and shooting them in the head with the dud shot. Shooting them with the dud shot or just hitting them in the head with the explosive shot should kill them on pretty much any difficulty if you're running full damage with Demo. If the shell is a dud though, I think on the highest difficulty with 6-man Hell on Earth, I don't think it will kill a Skrake without the Skrake taking damage. Although it will weaken the Skrake immensely and stagger them, so usually you only have to do it twice and you'll kill them with the dud. You can still, I believe, kill them with 1 from the explosion though. I think you do enough damage then. Skrakes take 10% reduced damage from shotguns, 20% reduced damage from handguns, 25% reduced damage from the Hemogoblin specifically, not its bleeding effect, but the actual impact of the weapon. Piercing damage as well. 60% reduced damage from explosives, so like I said with the RPG, you will still do more damage with the explosive, but it will be reduced damage from the explosive. 70% reduced damage from fire. Fire doesn't do particularly well against them, and 75% reduced damage towards toxic. Once again, poison doesn't do incredibly well against them. The weapon that stands out here is definitely the RPG. The RPG can kill Skrakes incredibly fast. Microwave weapons also do quite well against them, and rifles do very well against them. Shotguns and handguns also don't do bad against them, even with its reduced damage. And assault rifles and submachine guns get a little bit of a bonus here because they're just doing neutral damage, unlike against flesh pounds where you're doing greatly reduced damage. But they're still usually not the best weapons to be fighting Skrakes with. Melee weapons are quite good against them too, as they do neutral damage, for the most part with slashing and bludgeoning, so you can melee fight Skrakes pretty easily once you get the timing down of blocking their chainsaw and parrying their attacks. You can do it without too much trouble. Even with something like the knife you can do it, but it's not as easy. It is kind of fun to do though. So hopefully this helped you out and hopefully you found it kind of entertaining. If you did and you'd like to see more of this stuff, be sure that you get subscribed. That way you get notifications whenever I post any of these videos. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. I really do appreciate it, and I will talk to all of you guys next time. Till then, stay cool and bye.